world of energy is changing. We need more energy, a lot more, and we need it fast. At the same time, our current energy system is one of the leading causes of climate change thanks to the emissions of greenhouse gases that heat the planet. Solar and wind are the most pointed to of future energy sources, but they aren't alone. In the energy markets, a battle is beginning to see who will dominate the future of energy and which forms of energy production are most likely to deliver a clean future. Among the new contenders is geothermal energy, or energy derived from the heat underneath our feet. Already, we can see that in some places in the world, we're using geothermal to fuel all kinds of products, needs, and electric infrastructures. And new technologies around geothermal hope to make it an even larger part of our energy market. So today, we're talking all about geothermal, what it is, how it impacts Houston, and how it's growing. I'm Weston Twardowski, an instructor in and the Associate Director of Rice University's Center for Environmental Studies, and the Associate Director of EcoStudio in Rice's Sustainability Institute. And you're listening to Gulf Streams on KPFT Houston 90.1 FM, Galveston 89.5 FM, and Huntsville 89.7 FM, where we talk with leading experts and community leaders to better understand the environmental problems and potential solutions facing our community. A quick reminder that you can catch up on Gulf Streams anytime through our podcast. It's available on all major podcast platforms. If you enjoy the show, please like and subscribe to make sure that you never miss an episode, and tell your friends about it. It really helps us to get the word out about the show and what we're doing. For today's main story, we're talking all about geothermal energy, what it is, how it's made, what it means for our energy future. And so we reached out to Sage Geosystems, a Houston-based startup working on geothermal, to talk all about this growing field. Cindy Taff is the CEO of Sage Geosystems Incorporated. Cindy, welcome to the program.
Weston, thank you for letting me join you today.
Absolutely. Excited to chat some. So just to start off, I'm going to ask you the really overly broad question of what is geothermal energy?
Yeah. So geothermal energy is when you take the natural heat of the earth, you bring it to the surface in one form or fashion, and you turn it either into electricity, or you can use it for other things like direct heating, district heating of buildings, or direct heat for industrial processes.
So I think when people, if they are familiar with geothermal, what they're familiar with are places like Iceland, right? Where we already know there's a lot of heat coming out of the earth, and we've used hot springs for millennia, and humans have used geothermal energy in various ways for centuries, thousands of years. But this is not that. The way we're thinking about geothermal now is something new. So how is it different from the kind of historic ways that we've utilized geothermal?
So that's a great introduction. You're right. So all of the 17 gigawatts of geothermal production around the world is from what you explained, conventional hydrothermal geothermal. So think Iceland, geysers of California. What you have is a very unicorn geology, so it needs to be close to a volcano or the ring of fire, but you have heat combined with huge volumes of water to bring that heat to surface, plus a permeability of the rock that is such that it allows that water to flow. So what we're going after is next generation geothermal, but it's geothermal in rock that is hot, but it doesn't have those huge volumes of entrained water. So what we need to do is basically drill a well, create a heat exchanger of sorts in the subsurface, and then we're pumping water from the surface into this heat exchanger, harvesting the heat, and then that water brings the heat to the surface so that we can use it either for direct heating or for electricity generation.
And so when you say direct heating, I think the examples that I've seen, particularly some of the newer tech examples that seem to kind of spring up a lot in the news, do seem to be more like geothermal heat pumps. And there have been a number of actually apartment buildings in New York City, of all places, that seem to keep going in, which really has to do with the fact that New York passed a lot of regulations around natural gas many years back, so it's been a popular method of heating. But I think that's what maybe folks are most familiar with. So is that what you're talking about with direct heat, or?
Not really.
Okay.
So heat pumps actually, as you said, they've been around for a long time. The wells are only drilled to a depth of maybe 100 feet, maybe a couple of 100 feet. But what you're doing for heat pumps is using the fact that the temperature of the earth at these depths is always a constant, say, 60 degrees F. And so you can use that to more efficiently either cool a building or heat a building. What I'm talking about is deep geothermal, where you are actually getting enough heat that you can generate electricity, or you can heat. Let's use Romania as an example. They have district heating that encompasses the whole city. So Bucharest, they have district heating that goes from building to building to building. It's actually heat that can heat those buildings directly rather than a assistance to an HVAC system.
Okay, so I mean, I don't tend to think of Bucharest as being on the Ring of Fire. So,
No.
I mean, that's showing me somewhere different that this kind of work can happen. And there's clearly different levels at which people are thinking about this kind of heating. So I'm curious about, you mentioned this drilling down. So clearly more than a few hundred feet. I think that the deepest I've seen for heat pumps is, maybe like 500 feet max. So how far are we drilling for this kind of really, hot, deep in the earth kind of temperature?
Yeah. So for electricity generation, we need a formation temperature of at least 150 degrees C, which
Okay.
is 300 degrees F.
Okay.
And it really depends on where you are, on how deep you have to drill to get to that. So let's just use an example. In the western U.S., you can hit those temperatures as shallow as 3,000, 5,000, 6,000 feet. But in Texas, we have to drill to 15, 16, 17,000 feet. Wow. So we're going after the temperature versus the depth, but it will depend geographically or for the geology in the area how deep you have to drill to get to that heat.
Well, and I think one of the reasons, I'll say your company, Sage, is based here in Houston, right?
Yes,
Yes.
correct.
I think it's one of the things we've talked about on the show previously is there is a lot of interest, I think particularly from Houstonians around geothermal, because you're mentioning drilling a lot. You're talking about drilling pretty deep, thousands and thousands of feet. There's a lot of oil and gas drilling expertise around the area and around the Gulf South more broadly. And so I think for many folks who are hearing about energy transitions, who are thinking about cleaner tech, geothermal feels like an opportunity to leverage some of the expertise the region already has into a new energy sector.
Absolutely. So the oil and gas industry is a great segue into geothermal as a clean energy source. It's not only the technical skills, so think about geologists, geophysicists, drilling engineers, reservoir engineers, facilities engineers, but they're also their leadership or project management skill set. So the ability to manage multi-billion-dollar projects, the ability to drive down costs very quickly with scale. And then the last thing just to mention is we are leveraging the infrastructure, so the equipment, not only the skills, but the equipment, the knowledge, the ability to call out service companies and get a well drilled very quickly and very efficiently.
Well, in that sense, I'm curious then, realistically, how much energy do you think geothermal could produce? I know it's in many ways, especially this kind of new geothermal, we mentioned, it's got a long history, sure, in various forms, but this kind of sophisticated drilling, which really the technology grows out of the fracking technology boom that's happened over the last couple of decades. I'm curious about what is the real potential for geothermal in terms of maybe market share, but also just how much energy can it actually produce?
Well, maybe a good way to characterize that is we were asked by one of the data center hyperscalers, can you guys deliver 5 gigawatts in 5 years? So what we did is we looked at just in the lower 48 U.S., we looked at the geothermal potential. We took out, parks, national parks, monuments, because we weren't going to drill in those areas. We took out slopes greater than 20% because even though you can drill on the side of a mountain, you're most likely not going to do that. And we assumed of the remaining area that we would only have market accessibility to like 20%. There was still 4 terawatts of geothermal potential left in that model. So then we said, okay, to deliver 5 gigawatts in 5 years, we need to be able to drill 500 wells a year for 5 years, so 2,500 wells. Well, the oil and gas industry drills 25,000 wells a year in the U.S. alone, so you're leveraging less than 5% of the oil and gas industry. So can we deliver 5 gigawatts in 5 years? Absolutely. It's just a matter of capital and being able to raise the money. The infrastructure from the oil and gas industry is there. The other thing would be on the supply chain side. The companies that build organic Rankine cycle turbines, which are used most typically in geothermal power plants, they're not used to making these by the hundreds. So you would have to bolster that supply chain. But what we're also doing is we've designed and built our own supercritical CO2 turbine. And so we've actually just done a spin test and a what we call a load test where we generated electricity with the turbine. And so even though it's a prototype, in about a year and a half, we'll be ready to go to the field with that, with a field version of that. So I think that would help bolster that supply chain side.
And what does the CO2 turbine do?
The CO2 turbine actually converts the heat into electricity. But as compared to the organic Rankine cycle turbine, it is a smaller turbine, so it's going to be cheaper to build. But it also uses a slightly different thermodynamic cycle. So for each unit of heat that you put through the turbine, you're going to get more electricity. And that is so important in the pursuit to drive down the cost per kilowatt hour of geothermal production.
Well, again, I want to go back for a second, just for those of us who aren't as technically steeped in some of this. You had mentioned 5 gigawatts, and I'm curious, what amount of energy is that for lame folk like me? You know, are we talking about, is that a city? Is that many cities? Is that 3 houses? Like, what is the scale of 5 gigawatts?
Okay, so 5 gigawatts is about 5,000 megawatts,
Okay.
and 1 megawatt will power on average 700 to 800 U.S. households.
Okay.
And as the electrification of our lives increases, the number of houses that 1 megawatt will power is actually going down. So as people buy EVs and just turn their house again more into electric power, that number of houses will actually decrease.
Okay. So as the need for energy goes up, we see that how far that energy stretches is going to go down naturally. I mean, that makes total sense. And so I think some of what I'm hearing from you is very much something that I think the energy, many folks in the energy industry will offer is, our power demands are not going down, and we kind of need every source of energy we can get. Of course, that runs into the real issue of many forms of our energy production system are heating the planet, are having really terrible climatological consequences, environmental consequences. And so, I mean, I think that's part of what draws you to geothermal, is it is billed as a green kind of industry and energy source. So what does that mean? How clean is geothermal?
I would say we never say zero emissions, but when we're in the construction of geothermal, we will have emissions because we have a drilling rig, and not always can you connect that drilling rig to a electric power source. Sometimes you can, and if you can't, you have to run it with a diesel engine. We will have trucks operating in order to support the activities of drilling the well and constructing the power plant. But once it's operational, it really is near zero emissions, so very, very clean. And
I mean, there's certainly the emission standpoint, which I think is the driving factor for most people, because exactly once we get these facilities up and running, it's certainly a kind of not even comparable to traditional oil and gas, say. But I'm curious about, there, as I mentioned, geothermal tech really does grow out of fracking technology, and there are quite a lot of concerns people have on both sides of kind of the issue around fracking. It's very popular. It's led to a massive energy boom. And there are real environmental consequences. Probably the one people are most familiar with is kind of the seismological consequences, the earthquakes that people have heard about that were really focused on in the news, particularly in the 2000s and 2010s. But there's also a lot to the fact that water has to get pumped down into the earth, and kind of saltwater runoff can happen from this. Pits for the wastewater have to go somewhere. So is geothermal operating in the same space? And if so, what are steps that we can do, not just to reduce some of those consequences, but also perhaps to be good neighbors to people who we can imagine, if we are seeing cities like you mentioned Bucharest that are really running off of these systems, what are ways and strategies of making sure these are responding to community needs and concerns?
So let's talk about the water first, and then we'll talk about the fracturing. So in conventional hydrothermal, geothermal that we talked about, so Iceland, you do produce those huge volumes of saltwater brine, and they do have a lot of minerals that they've basically absorbed in the water over the years. So you do have to be careful on how you handle that water, how you dispose of it. What we're doing, though, is, again, we're creating a artificial reservoir or tank of sorts in the hot rock, and then we're pumping relatively fresh water from the surface into the rock. It doesn't have enough time in the rock to absorb minerals, so it comes back out as with the same salinity as what we pumped. We actually find, because the well and the fracture serve as a huge separator, that the water cleans up over time. So we don't have the water disposal issues that conventional geothermal have. We do need to use large volumes of water. However, the volumes of water that we use are significantly less than coal plants and natural gas plants, because they need the water for cooling and such. So I would say on balance, the water situation with geothermal is going to be a lot better than other technologies, other power generation technologies, and conventional geothermal. So now let's talk about induced seismicity, because that is important. So induced seismicity, earthquakes and tremors. So we take that very serious. We actually monitor for earthquakes and tremors on all of our operations. We actually hire a third party to do that. It happens to be the University of Texas Bureau of Economic Geology, because they've got a great program. So they'll put monitoring stations all around our operations. They'll monitor while we're drilling, while we're fracturing, and then while we're cycling the water. And we've never seen any induced seismicity. So our technology has actually got a very low risk of induced seismicity, because what we're doing when we place the fracture in the subsurface, we're wanting it to be in low permeability rock, and we don't want to intersect any natural faults, because the way we operate our fracture is kind of like a balloon, or if you think about how your lungs operate. So we pump water in, we inflate the lungs or the balloon, and then we let it deflate slightly, then we inflate, deflate. So if we were to intersect a fault, that fault would bring the water away from our system. And so the way earthquakes and tremors happen is when you either pump or produce fluid past a naturally occurring fault, it lubricates the fault and makes the fault slip. So we are avoiding those faults, and so that means we are going to have a very low risk of induced seismicity or earthquakes or tremors. But again, we do take it seriously because, as you say, people are worried about it. We actually use a different fracking technology than oil and gas as well. We don't put proppant in the fracture because we're holding the fracture open with pressure. And so just a lot of different things about our fracturing technique than what is used in the oil and gas industry.
No, that's fascinating. Yeah, because I mean, it's one of those things where we've heard kind of where technology comes from to some extent, but we don't know exactly necessarily what the cutting edge or where things are moving. Because certainly things that grow out of any old technology, are going to move pretty quickly once the train starts running on that. So I'm curious about we've talked a little bit about both the scale of how you're imagining growing up, I think particularly Sage, and I'd love to hear more about, what drove you into this work in particular. But I mean, I think something that's interesting is that water issue, which is real, and I really appreciate you mentioning, the same kind of needs as coal or natural gas, which I think is a great frame. Is that going to limit the geography? Because to my eyes, at least, one of the advantages of geothermal is, particularly with some of the newer tech, that it can be developed in myriad places. And I imagine one of the things you would say it's useful for is those kind of spaces when, as folks love to critique, when the sun's not out and when the wind isn't blowing, we can have different debates about how concerned you really need to be about, kind of green tech failing on you as it just grows kind of in a remarkable market capacity. But as we do continue to develop new energy needs, and as we do continue to develop energy needs that are not always perfectly suited to the kind of most well-known green tech of solar and wind, it seems like geothermal is well positioned as a kind of third adaptable green technology. And so I do wonder if the water needs limit that kind of scope you were talking about, or if that's just something that's not even a concern.
Thanks for asking, because I should have went into more detail. So while we put huge volumes of water in the subsurface and we cycle it in and out, we are only losing about 2%. So,
Oh, wow.
So due to evaporation and then due to a slight, what they call a leak off into the matrix of the rock. And so, and that leak off into the matrix of the rock actually decreases with cycles. So even though we use large volumes of water, the actual losses are less than 2%, meaning maybe, 300 barrels a day. And that's maybe 1,200 gallons a day. So it's not very big. I'm sorry, 12,000 gallons a day.
So yeah, I'd love to hear a little more about Sage in particular, and where the motivation to form Sage came from for those of you who were involved in forming the company, what the direction is looking like, and you yourself, what brought you into geothermal work.
Yeah, so we formed Sage 4 years ago. So the majority of the company has an oil and gas background. So I was at Shell for 35 years. I left Shell at the end of 2020. I was their VP of unconventional wells, global operations. We had operations in Canada, U.S., South America, even Ukraine and China at one time. It was my team that always did the cost estimates for geothermal, but I noticed that we never pulled the trigger and did any projects. And I suspect these are mostly coded projects, so you didn't know all the details of it because it was kind of a secret project. So I suspect the reason why the trigger wasn't pulled is because the cost or the economics didn't weigh up to oil and gas. So I really wanted to get into renewables, but I wanted to be able to use my skill set. And if I look at solar and wind, I'm not able to do that. So geothermal was the perfect answer. So yeah, so we got entered into the geothermal market 4 years ago, got to the field very quickly to test our technologies, and now we're actually advancing two business lines, one being energy storage deep in the earth. So if you think about pumped hydro, where you pump a lake up a mountain, and then you let that lake, basically the water run down the mountain when you need power. We're doing that, except one of our lakes is deep in the earth. And then the other is geothermal, but geothermal requires the heat. Energy storage, we can do just about anywhere, but geothermal, we need to be able to drill to the 150 degrees C formations at a depth that oil and gas can drill to today, which is about 20,000 feet or shallower.
Well, I'm curious then, yeah, and this is something I wanted to get into a little bit is, I'm impressed by a number of I think there have been a number of kind of new geothermal startups. There's certainly interest in the sector. It's growing. I know of two geothermal groups here in Houston alone. But I'm curious about, if the tech grew out of, kind of traditional oil and gas tech. And it sits with so many, as you mentioned, oil and gas people, and it's familiar with, the kind of technology that's required. Why don't we just see Chevron and Shell and Aramco, developing all this and kind of cornering the market?
It's a great question. I do think they're watching the market. I do think they're looking at the various players that are, as you said, working in hot dry rock, and we're all doing something a little bit different in order to kind of crack the nut on making hot dry rock geothermal economically viable. And I do think they'll come into the market when they see maybe one of the technologies start leading, but. Yeah, I think it depends on each of the companies. Some of the companies are more focused on their oil and gas background, and then some have ventured into the renewable space, but in different ways. I know Shell ventured into the renewable space with wind and solar and, EV power stations or charging stations and such. So I think it's just dependent on each of the companies.
Fair enough. That they will do what they want. I'm curious. I guess some of that is just how much growth potential do you think there are for newer startups in this space?
Oh, I think there's a huge growth potential. So we've got a few of our investors being strategic investors, so they have a background in the oil and gas industry. So Chesapeake, which is now Expand Energy, is one of our investors. Neighbors, which is one of the largest onshore drilling contractors in the world. Geolog, which is a subsurface characterization company out of Italy. So they're investors in what we're doing, and they do see huge growth. So I do think once we have cracked the nut on the cost per kilowatt hour of delivering geothermal electricity from geothermal, that the scale is going to be very similar to the unconventional shale.
Something else that I know your company has begun working on is around storage. So can you walk us through that a little bit?
Oh, yeah. So maybe energy storage and maybe where we are.
Yeah.
So we are actually, I said we're 4 years old, but we are actually commissioning our first energy storage facility here in December, so next month. We just got the funding about a year ago, so we can move very quickly to actually get it into the field. It's a 3-megawatt system. We're actually installing it at a lignite coal plant. And why is that interesting? Because the lignite coal plant is going to be installing solar, and so they wanted a front row seat to our energy storage to pair solar, which is intermittent, with a energy storage system. And then for geothermal, we're going to have our first electricity generation in partnership with the U.S. Air Force in second quarter of next year, also in Texas. We happen to be, we have a lot going on in Texas because Texas is just a really friendly place. You can get permits, pretty quickly. The Railroad Commission understands what we're doing, and they understand, how our well design is very similar to oil and gas well designs. And so it's really a friendly area to be working.
Are you finding that it's trickier in other places that are maybe more reticent towards new tech, or?
I think the tricky part for permitting is where there's not a lot of oil and gas drilling because they don't have that permitting or that regulatory already stood up. And then some areas it's just longer. So in California, it usually takes a year and a half to get a permit, whereas in Texas, you can get it within 4 weeks, something like that. Places like Louisiana, we're finding is 6 weeks. So I think where you have oil and gas drilling, you can get permits a lot quicker.
Something that's occurring to me that I'm intrigued by now is just, I think we imagine oil and gas, right? We drill down, we find where the oil is, and we take it. It's being a bit reductive, but that's kind of the idea. I'm curious about the fact that you mentioned storage, the fact that you're mentioning, similar permitting systems, though. I imagine it's not like heat just magically vanishes and you suck up all the Earth's heat. And so I can see, or I could imagine that these wells will exist a lot longer, potentially, than some of the oil and gas wells will.
So for geothermal, there is thermal degradation that you have to take into account in both your well design and your operating cost. It's about 10% over 5 years. And so what you have to do is after about 5 years, you need to move to another part of the wellbore and install new fractures and then cycle those. But after you cycle those for 5 years, then the original fractures that you put in can have already heated back up. So to your point, it does replenish itself.
So it's kind of like crop rotation, but energy rotation, or
That's
just
it.
move around.
That's a great analogy. That's a great analogy.
Well, I think that's the time that we have for today. Thank you so much for sitting down with us and telling us all about what your company is up to and where Sage is going and the new directions in geothermal that are springing up.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Now we'll go to our researcher, Nomin who talks to us about something related to energy, the growing need of energy, specifically around AI and data centers. This has been a big story of the last few months as AI has really taken off. And so we're doing a quick deep dive right into this issue, thinking about why we need more energy, where that energy could come from. And I think it's a great follow-up to our conversation all around geothermal and the various emergent forms of energy that might help us to meet some of these new requirements.
It's a warm yet breezy October morning here at Rice University. The crisp air and the falling of leaves bring warmth to the busy campus. Amidst midterms, students bustle and weave around, their conversations a blend of laughter and stress.
Okay. I'm here with two students, Jesse, a sophomore studying math and econ, and Gavin, a sophomore studying computer science. I wanted to ask, if you use AI and large language models like ChatGPT, how often do you use ChatGPT in your everyday life?
Around every day, I think. And I don't really use it to answer questions. I use it also for like learning about the material. I think it's very helpful because it has everything in its database already.
Yeah, I mean, I would also say every day, like along similar lines to what Jesse said. I think like the real value of ChatGPT is that it can be personalized to each individual for their personal use. So it's like having a tutor by your side all the time.
Okay, thank you. And what would you say your reasoning is for using these models, and how much of your AI usage do you think is explicitly for school?
I think, for me at least, it's mostly for school because I wouldn't need to ask like an AI for like anything else because school is the main thing that I need like help with, and I'm a full-time student, so there's nothing there's nothing else like going on for me except like school. So.
Yeah, I mean, as a full-time student, like most of my day revolves around just doing schoolwork and going about my day. So I'd say most of my use for ChatGPT is for academics. Although it's also helpful for just learning about random things or like helping you make decisions because it presents information in a lot more digestible way than like Google or any other search engine would.
And these student answers are not unexpected. According to recent polling from Impact Research, almost half of teachers, students K through 12, and undergraduate students use AI chatbots at least once a week for educational purposes. For undergraduate students, another 33% report using AI at least every once in a while. Despite these findings for students specifically, we also find that users outside of education are beginning to use AI models for one reason or another. Studies show that Americans' use of ChatGPT specifically is increasing. According to the Pew Research Center, only a quarter of US adults report never using ChatGPT, leaving over 75% of the entire US adult population to report using ChatGPT. Adults appear to use ChatGPT for workplace tasks, learning, and entertainment. Interestingly, we see that highly educated adults are the most likely to have used it, where 37% of those with a postgraduate or advanced degree and 29% of those with a bachelor degree report using ChatGPT. Work also seems to play a large factor in AI chatbot usage, where 30% of employed adults under 30 say they have used ChatGPT for workplace tasks. It's clear that Americans' use of ChatGPT and other large language models is increasing. Worldwide, we are seeing the same trend, and according to Backlinko, ChatGPT has 200 million weekly active users worldwide and over 67 million active users in the US alone. It's not surprising why so many people are engaged with these models. AI models like ChatGPT from OpenAI, Gemini from Google, and Claude from Anthropic can perform complex operations such as voice response generation, image generation, data analysis, and programming, which can be useful to people looking to learn something new or complete workplace tasks with the assistance of AI. Despite their interesting uses, these technologies require an immense amount of energy to train and generate responses, taking a toll on energy resources. Training these models requires intense, complex calculations to generate responses to users' unique inputs, which requires analyzing millions of pieces of data. This training alone takes months and generates immense amounts of heat. To train GPT-3, Microsoft's data center used 700,000 liters of water. Similarly, Meta used around 22 million liters of water to train its Llama 3 model. After training, generating responses to users' unique inputs and inquiries also generates heat, which requires intense cooling mechanisms. According to the Washington Post, in collaboration with the University of California, Riverside, generating a simple 100-word email once using the highly capable GPT-4 requires a bottle of water. Generating the same email once weekly requires over 27 liters of water, and once weekly for a year, for 1 out of 10 Americans, requires over 430 million liters, or the equivalent of all water consumed by all Rhode Island households for 1.5 days. When electricity is a cheaper cooling mechanism, data centers are also opting for air conditioning cooling, which may be draining the local electric grids and increasing power bills for residents nearby. To go back to the previous example, generating a 100-word email requires the electricity equivalent to lighting 14 LED light bulbs for 1 hour. Once weekly for a year requires the electricity equivalent to over 9 households for an hour, and once weekly for a year for 1 out of 10 Americans requires over 120,000 megawatt hours, or the electricity consumed by all DC households for 20 days. On the worldwide scale, a recent peer-reviewed study suggests that AI could make up 0.5% of worldwide electricity usage by 2027, or the equivalent of the country of Argentina's entire electrical output in a year. Tech companies are now finding that their current data centers cannot handle the amount of energy required to uphold these models. Data centers are the backbone of artificial intelligence. These centers house servers running GPUs, which are specialized hardware for high-demand tasks such as training large language models. These GPUs generate significant amounts of heat and require the heavy-duty cooling mechanisms discussed earlier. Not only have companies resorted to increased water and electricity usage to uphold these data centers, but carbon emissions have also surged. For example, Google's emissions increased 48% since 2019, and Meta's emissions have similarly increased 66% over 2 years, largely due to the explosion of the AI tasks that they support. With AI usage increasing, tech companies are also expanding these data centers. Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and Meta have all announced plans to build new, larger data centers in places like Indiana and Iowa. However, energy demands required by these data centers are not being met with the current energy allocations. As artificial intelligence only stands to grow, with data centers predicted to account for 8% of total US energy usage by 2030, according to Goldman Sachs, companies are struggling to find new sources of energy, either tapping into the existing grid or building new plants to supply their energy-hungry data centers. As demand for energy surges, some companies are now relying on restarting traditional carbon-heavy energy sources such as coal. In Salt Lake City, the retirement of a large coal plant was pushed back by an entire decade to support data center energy needs in the area. Microsoft recently announced plans for a $3.3 billion data center in Milwaukee, which led to the delay of the shutdown of nearby local coal plants. In Omaha, Google and Meta also set up data centers where a coal plant that was supposed to retire in 2022 is now operational through at least 2026. With increasing carbon emissions and even the usage of non-renewable energy sources like coal, tech companies with promises to go carbon neutral are now scrambling for new ways to produce the amount of energy needed to keep up with artificial intelligence in addition to their other computing services. Some companies are now exploring nuclear energy technologies to meet the demand. Oracle, for instance, announced its plans to use small modular reactors to power their upcoming AI data center. Unlike traditional nuclear reactors, small modular reactors can be built off-site, produce less power, but are more affordable. Though ideal, no small modular reactor has been successfully built in the United States, with SMR-permitted companies largely failing due to increasing costs and lack of support. While Oracle's plans are still in development, people are both hopeful and skeptical about the shift toward these new nuclear technologies to provide carbon-free energy that data centers need. Microsoft also seems to be on this new nuclear train. Bill Gates, a known advocate for nuclear innovation, is backing TerraPower, a project used to develop advanced reactors on former coal mining operations in Wyoming. Microsoft is also in collaboration with a nuclear fusion company, Helion, aiming to harness the power of nuclear fusion, a feat that has yet to be accomplished in the last 50 years by 2028. experts are not so sure about these companies' ambitious goals. TerraPower has yet to construct these reactors, as the type of enriched uranium required is not available in the United States, and Helion's ambitious efforts for fusion by 2028 have largely been debunked by nuclear experts. Despite these issues, growing interest and investment into nuclear energy to back data centers seems to be a growing sentiment. As artificial intelligence's role in our daily lives expands, the race to meet its power needs is likely to accelerate. With investments in renewables and advanced nuclear technologies, tech companies are grappling with how to sustainably power the technology that is shaping the world. But as recent coal plant revivals show, the path forward will require balancing innovation with responsible choices about energy and climate impact.
And now we go to our piece from our researcher, Sophia Soltes, her ongoing series Critter Corner, where she talks with leading experts in the area all about their favorite local fauna.
Hi everyone, it's Sophia, and welcome back to Critter Corner, where we dive into Houston's fascinating wildlife. In each episode, we feature experts and enthusiasts who share their favorite local animals or plants, the roles in our ecosystem, and ways we can all support our community's biodiversity. For the second episode of this series, we will be talking to Della Barbado, Director of Education at the Native Prairies Association of Texas. Welcome to the show, Della.
Thanks, Sophia.
Of course. To start off, can you tell me a bit about yourself and the work that you do?
As you mentioned, I'm Director of Education for Native Prairies, and I am very lucky that there is a remnant prairie here in the Houston area, which is very rare. Less than 1% of remnant prairies exist across the United States, but also in the coastal prairie ecosystem. So remnant just means that it's never been plowed and it's never been developed. So the genetics that are there have been there for thousands of years, like up to 15,000 years. So I get to teach at Deer Park Prairie, where there are over 370 native species of plants. Swallow that for a minute. And so I do student field trips out there, teacher workshops. I was just out there yesterday with a group of high school students collecting some of the Houston critters that we're going to talk about. And I also do classroom presentations and adult tours.
Della, thank you so much for coming on. We're so happy to have you. So now that we know you a bit better, we're here to talk about your favorite local species. Can you tell us about what species you'll be talking about today and why it's special to you?
Absolutely. My favorite species, and I'm sorry to say there's more than one, the swallowtail butterflies. So many people choose the monarchs or even the Gulf fritillary, which you should plant passion vine for, but the swallowtails are larger, they're local, they are beautiful butterflies. So there are the giant, the black, and the pipe vine swallowtail that I would love for your people to Google.
We'll make sure to do that. Could you tell me a bit about what role this species plays in Houston's ecosystem?
Well, they, as all butterflies do, they have a life cycle of four, different stages. The adult lays the egg, which turns into the caterpillar, which eats the host plant. And then that turns into the beautiful adult butterfly. And for me, I mean, the role of the butterfly, beauty for us, but they don't care about that. So it's just, I mean, as far as any species, the human, factor doesn't really matter to them, right? So they just want to exist. That's their role, just to exist. And so if we plant those host plants, which I would love to list, then we can ensure that they will continue to exist. So without the host plants, the swallowtails do not exist.
Yeah, well, we'll get to some ways that people can support this butterfly in a second, but before that, what's one surprising fact about this butterfly that people might not know?
Surprising fact about this butterfly, they're huge, they're bright colors, they're gorgeous. They have, the black swallowtail has little blue dots. And the other swallowtails are just as gorgeous. They have different shapes. And to me, it's just their surprising fact is just their beautiful, brilliant colors and their beauty.
Yeah. And is the swallowtail butterfly a type of butterfly that you can see in the downtown Houston area, like in more of a cityscape, or are they just on the prairie?
If people plant their host plants, then they will come. It's kind of like that saying, if you build it, they will come. The adult butterflies can travel up to a mile to find their host plants, but when they lay that egg, then the next adult, after, all the stages, can find the next one. So what we need is some contiguous planting of the host plants. And
Yeah.
if that happened, then absolutely they can go downtown.
Yeah, for sure. And perfectly leading off of that point, what are some simple ways people can support the swallowtail butterfly?
Planting the host plant is absolutely key because the adults can drink nectar from many, many, many native plants. And I'm not even going to list those because there are so many, but the adult can only lay her egg. The caterpillar can only eat the host plant. So for the giant swallowtail, that is a citrus tree. Now, the native citrus tree is trifoliate orange, and that has beautiful, wonderful smelling flowers. I mean, if you've never smelled an orange flower, it's absolutely wonderful. And the Hercules club tree is also a host plant. For the black swallowtail, prairie parsley is the really good native plant, but also anything in the carrot family. So fennel and dill. So, if you see caterpillars on your carrot plant, please don't kill it. It's not a pest. It's a beautiful thing that's going to turn into a butterfly. And I'm going to say that about caterpillars everywhere. They are necessary to create their life cycle, and they are necessary for the birds to eat. So please don't kill caterpillars. Pipe vine swallowtail, you want to plant some pipe vines. The woolly Dutchman's pipe vine is native to this area. And then for the Gulf fritillary butterfly, plant passion vine. It's absolutely a gorgeous flower to add to your patio or yard.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Della. It's been such a pleasure to learn about the swallowtail butterfly and how important it is to local ecosystems.
Thank you, Sophia.
For everyone listening, make sure to check out some of the host plants that Della mentioned if you would like to see more of these large butterflies around your home. We will be back soon with another episode of Critter Corner, and thank you for listening.
Lastly, our researcher Jaden Bray Boyce will tell you how you can get involved this week around town here in Houston to make it just a little bit greener.
Hey y'all, I hope you're doing well. If you're looking for something fun and fulfilling to do this week in the Houston area, consider getting involved with one of these great organizations. On Tuesday, November 26th, spend time with the University of Houston Clear Lake and help with the maintenance of the smart water habitat from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. If you choose to volunteer, you will be able to aid in the weeding, mulching flower beds, planting native species, and clearing and maintaining pathways, in addition to potentially trimming trees and bushes. This Tuesday, you might even get lucky and be able to help clean out the pond. If you're new to outdoor volunteering, no worries at all, as all the supplies you'll need will be provided, such as gloves and any tools, though don't be discouraged, you can bring your own if you so choose. If this is an activity that excites you, don't hesitate to get your hands dirty and help maintain Houston's beautiful outdoor spaces. If you're looking for a way to get involved that provides more flexibility due to Thanksgiving approaching, consider sprucing up your outdoor spaces to make them more bird-friendly. If you live in an area with little or no outdoor or green spaces but want to make your home inviting or friendly to birds, consider implementing a few things to your space, including planting native plants, putting decals or stickers or shades on your window to reduce bird collisions, or avoid using pesticides on any plants that you have growing. Additionally, if you really want to see birds or make your home feel like their home, you can add window bird feeders. Now, if you live in a place where you have a little outdoor space but it's mainly paved, have no fear, as there are quite a few things you can do to make your space more inviting or safe for birds as well. Given the space, consider adding a standing bird feeder or bird bath. You can also turn off your lights at night or shut your blinds to help reduce bird collisions in the evening. Lastly, you could also plant hanging native plants to welcome birds right into your backyard. And lastly, for those of you with slightly larger backyards, you could add bird baths with a moving water feature, create safe spots in your yard for birds to rest, or install birdhouses on your property. Additionally, consider replacing your fertilizers with something non-toxic to birds who may use your backyard as a resting place or a home. All of these suggestions are brought to you by Houston Audubon, so be sure to check out their website at houstonaudubon.org to stay up to date on volunteering opportunities as well as more helpful tips when it comes to birds. So with that, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day and a very happy Thanksgiving to all of those who celebrate.
That's our show for today, and we'd just like to shout out that it's a happy holiday season. We hope it's a great season for you. We're very excited for the holidays here, and so we'll be taking a few weeks off and a few weeks for the holidays, but we're wishing you the brightest and happiest of seasons and a happy Thanksgiving. A reminder that if you have questions or ideas for what you'd like featured on Gulf Streams, please call and leave us a voicemail at 713-348-4081, at 713-348-4081, or email us at westontrice.edu. The story today on geothermal was a listener suggestion, so we really take those seriously and love to follow up on listener ideas and questions and really get you answers. So if you have any interest and if you have any ideas, please reach out. A quick reminder that you can catch up on Gulf Streams anytime through our podcast, available on all major podcast platforms. If you enjoy the show, please like and subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. Gulf Streams is a co-production of KPFT Houston and Rice's Center for Environmental Studies, with support from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation and the Rice Sustainability Institute's Eco Studio. Produced by Weston Twardowski. Co-produced by Joseph Campana. Audio engineer Rico Enriquez. Original music by Carter Dean. Research support provided by Jaden Bray-Boyce, Sophia Soltez, and Nomin Rinsdorf. Stay tuned for the R&R Show with Ronnie Renfro and Tom Richards here on KPFT Houston 90.1 FM, Galveston 89.5 FM, and Huntsville 89.7 FM.